Welcome to the Planning Commission meeting on August 18th, 2020. This is a pre-recorded presentation related to survey results about growth and development and residential open space in Williston, Vermont.
Let's review the bylaw amendment process. After an amendment is proposed, the Planning Commission collects information and input before deciding next steps. Tonight, we're at the collect info phase.
The main goal of tonight's meeting is for the Planning Commission to listen, learn from the public input they hear, and ask questions of one another to help them make their decision about this process. There will be no decision made tonight related to this bylaw amendment. If the Planning Commission does decide in the future to move a bylaw amendment on, it would be reviewed and eventually either adopted or rejected by the Select Board. The Select Board is the body that approves changes to the rules in town, and then those changed rules would be administered by the Development Review Board. Again, we are here with the Planning Commission tonight. The town plan sets the overall direction for future growth and development in Williston and informs the rules or Unified Development Bylaw, which is applied by the Development Review Board when new projects are proposed. Tonight, we're talking about a potential change to the rules in Chapter 39, the Residential Zoning District, and how it handles open space. Let's spend a few minutes getting familiar with Williston from the perspective of zoning and land use planning. In the industrial parts of Williston, we don't allow new residential uses, and generally the open space requirements of the town do not apply. Williston's growth center, an area about 1.5 miles by 1.5 miles around the Taft Corners intersection, is where the majority of the town's new residential, commercial, and mixed-use growth is anticipated. Although open spaces are required in this district, it's typically small urban pocket parks and other pedestrian-oriented facilities as opposed to large natural areas. To balance growth and rural character in Williston, the bulk of new development is proposed to happen in the Taft Corners Growth Center, which is envisioned as developing into a design-conscious, pedestrian-friendly commercial center. In addition, the Growth Center, shown in red on this map, is flanked to the east and to the north by permanently protected open space, creating a buffer between this more intense development and the more suburban residential development beyond its boundaries. In contrast to the Growth Center, Williston has a large area outside of its sewer service area where low-density residential uses are the only uses allowed and where subdivisions are generally required to set aside 75% of their land area as permanently protected open space. The remaining area in town is the sewer service area outside of the Growth Center. This is where Williston anticipates residential subdivisions that are similar but not identical to existing neighborhoods on a handful of large acre parcels that remain in this area. Most of the new development in this area would be anticipated within the residential zoning district, which is the subject of our conversation this evening. The orange area on this map outlined in black is the residential zoning district. It represents 12% of the land area of town and is an area of town where only residential uses and childcare are allowed. No other commercial uses are allowed in this district. There is some open space required in this district, but it is not a percentage amount. And the discussion tonight is about considering the idea of requiring a percentage amount of open space of new subdivisions in this district.
This map shows all the parcels in the residential zoning district color-coded by size. To help orient, here's Route 2A, here's Interstate 89, North Williston Road, Mountain View Road. The white stripe is the Cirque Highway right-of-way. The parcels shown in light yellow are too small to subdivide, less than 2/3 of an acre, but they create about 3/4 of all the parcels in the zoning district. The parcels shown in maroon are greater than 10.5 acres. They create a lot of the land area in the residential zoning district, but are only 3% of the number of parcels in the district. The land shown in green on this map is not subdividable due to size or existing protections, such as conservation easements, designated open space, or HOA common land. Subtracting the land shown in green that's not eligible for subdivision, and you're left with a handful of parcels that could be impacted by a change to the open space bylaw requirements.
When we talk about requiring open space in Williston, what we mean is an area of land that's designated as being permanently protected from future development. And usually open space contains important natural resources that are desirable to protect. The town plan identifies the protection of open space as an important goal and discusses several methods by which open space may be protected, including through regulation, but also by purchase and funding of conservation easements within the town. The current regulations in the residential zoning district identify open space protection as a goal, but do not specify a quantitative minimum amount of open space that any one subdivision must preserve. Where there is no quantitative minimum requirement for open space in the RZD, the town could add a number of different tools to enhance protection of open space in this district. A percentage open space requirement could be added to the bylaw, as is under consideration tonight. The town could add language requiring the quality of open space to be more carefully examined, or the shape or configuration or contiguity of potential open space with other protected parcels could be given more weight, or the town may pursue other tools to enhance the protection of open space in this zoning district. Let's look at how open space works in a subdivision. Here we have a parcel of land, and here we have a conventional subdivision without an open space set aside. Building lots are dispersed evenly across the parcel. Here we have the same parcel of land in an open space subdivision configuration. Now there is a large open space parcel, and building lots, including a diversity of lot sizes and housing types, are concentrated on one portion of the parcel. Let's make this an example 12-acre parcel. Again, here's our conventional subdivision with 12 dwelling units. The density of the subdivision is 1 dwelling unit per acre. In our open space subdivision, we split the lot in half, and we now have 6 acres of open space, and the development is on the other 6 acres. The overall density of the project remains 1 dwelling unit per acre. But if we were to just look at the developed portion of the parcel and maybe not understand that the open space came along with it, we would perceive it as denser. It looks like 2 units per acre.
Many subdivisions in Williston are open space subdivisions. Much of the green on this map was achieved through some sort of open space subdivision, where development is concentrated to a small area of the parcel and remaining land becomes permanently protected open space. Sometimes open space is achieved through an offset. For example, Mud Pond was an offset for Taft Corners Park.
Williston has a track record of requiring open space to be provided as part of a subdivision in the RZD, even without requiring a certain percentage. Here are some examples. Brennan Woods, 53% open space. Southridge, 44% open space. Old Stage Estates, 62% open space. Coyote Run, 35% open space. Adding a minimum percentage open space requirement to the RZD would change some things about the way development takes place. It would likely change the design of new subdivisions, and that open space would provide places to walk and for wildlife habitat to protect water quality, preserve views, and preserve agricultural soils. Those are the things that open space does. But by itself, a minimum percentage open space requirement would not change the number of allowed dwelling units. And that means other things that come from the allowed dwelling units, such as the density, the unit size, style, or architectural design of the houses, traffic generation, would not be changed by the addition of a minimum open space requirement to the bylaw. So now let's talk about the survey results. We're going to summarize quite a bit here, so we want to remind everybody that all of the response data and a complete digest of all the written comments that were made in response to the survey are available on the town's website, and we will provide a link at the end of this presentation to that site. We conducted our survey during the months of July and August and mailed survey announcements to affected properties and the abutters to those properties in the residential zoning district. We publicized the survey in Planner's Corner and on Front Porch Forum, the town webpage, and the Williston Parents Facebook group. Overall, we received 221 responses to our survey.
The demographics of our survey respondents is similar to that of the overall town of Williston. We received 2 responses from people under the age of 18 and 2 over the age of 85, with the median in the 45 to 54 age category. We received responses from people who have lived in Williston for less than 1 year to 77 years, with the median residency of 11 years. The overwhelming majority of respondents own their own home, only 2% renting. We asked about commuting patterns before COVID. About 1/3 of respondents commute outside of Williston, and 1/4 do not work, including people who are retired.
Most of our respondents either agreed or strongly agreed that they understood about the 4 main areas of Williston, the residential zoning district, and the way open space is currently working in Williston. We showed survey respondents the goals the town plan expresses for open space in Williston and asked them to pick their top 3. Open space for wildlife habitat and watershed health were most frequently ranked by people in their top 3 goals for open space, with passive recreation a close second.
Open space is one of many goals that Williston is trying to achieve in the residential zoning district. So we asked our survey respondents to choose a top 3 and provide us with more information about what values they were interested in seeing achieved in the residential zoning district. Open space was most frequently ranked in the top 3 by survey respondents, followed by number of dwelling units, street and path connectivity, and affordability. Architectural design nearly tied for 3rd place with open space. It's important to note that beyond building height and setbacks, there are no architectural design standards in the residential zoning district. And we did hear a lot of feedback in the long answer questions about architectural design or lack thereof in Williston.
We also asked our survey respondents to tell us of all of the potential impacts of growth and development on the town, which were the ones they were most concerned about. Survey respondents ranked vehicle congestion highest, followed immediately by environmental impacts, then schools, noise, impacts to emergency services, vehicle speeds and safety, road and sidewalk maintenance, water and sewer, other, and lastly, the temporary impacts of construction from new development.
What do you like about your neighborhood? This was one of several open-ended questions that we asked in the survey. Tonight we'll be brief and skip over them, but we encourage you to go to the website and download the complete digest, where you can read all the questions and all the responses submitted by survey participants. The second half of the survey was the development preference exercise. Here, survey respondents were asked to think about the future of residential development throughout the town. Survey participants were asked 3 questions about new residential development: the rate of growth, the location in town, and the pattern of development.
We have a few caveats about the results of this part of our survey. Keep in mind we have a relatively small sample size of 221 responses, and the staff received a number of comments that the question format was confusing. So when you look at the following slides, think about how your answers stack up to existing town policy, which will identify against the results. The first question we asked was to identify a desirable development rate for Williston, expressed as the number of dwelling units per year that would be built in the town.
Here are the survey responses. The median response was 45 units per year as a preferred development rate. Existing town policy allows 80 units per year maximum. Actual build-out is slightly less at 76 units per year from 2009 to 2019. Compare this to 120 units per year, when the town experienced a strain on services in the early 1990s. At that time, there was no Allenbrook School, no local option sales tax to fund municipal services, no emergency medical staff, and relatively small police and fire departments. The second question was about development location. We asked survey respondents to distribute 100 units across the 3 major areas of town where residential development is allowed. The bar graph on the left is an average of all survey responses. On average, placing 47% of all future new units in the growth center, 27% in the sewer service area outside the growth center, and the remaining 26% outside the sewer service area shown in green on the map. The table on the left compares existing town policy to the survey responses. On average, town policy places more units in the growth center than the survey respondents, about the same in the sewer service area outside the growth center, and then fewer units than the survey respondents in the area shown in green outside the sewer service area.
We then asked our survey respondents about development pattern, again using 100 units and asking respondents to distribute those 100 units across the various development patterns from extremely dense to no development at all, as shown in this chart. Of the 100 units, respondents on average spread 66, or 2/3 of the units, fairly evenly across development patterns ranging from urban density to rural large lot subdivision. Williston's prevailing development pattern in the past was largely rural and suburban. Today, most new development in Williston is a little more dense and a little more urban. With Williston's current policy goals related to focusing growth in the growth center, most new units in Williston will be in an even more urban pattern, but will be limited geographically to the growth center. And there will be less rural development as open space requirements and land preservation efforts continue as directed by the town plan.
The survey respondents on average distributed 2/3 of the units fairly evenly on zones T6 to T2. 1/3 of the units were identified as conserve or no build, where units would be taken off the table for development. So if the survey respondent preference is to conserve or not build 1/3 of all future units, what does the town do to conserve that land? There are two primary tools, the transfer of development rights and the purchase of development rights.
The town plan identifies the purchase of easements, the transfer of development rights, and the maintenance of a working landscape as strategies it will continue to use to protect open space. To protect open space through the transfer of development rights, potential development in the rural part of town is removed from those lands which are conserved and concentrated into a receiving zone, in this case the town's growth center, where it is developed in a more urban pattern, leaving the protected land in the ag-rural district undeveloped. With the purchase of development rights, the town or another conservation entity pays the owners of rural lands to not build houses on their land and owns easements over that land. These potential future units are not built, but are locked up when those easements are achieved. Williston uses its Environmental Reserve Fund to purchase development rights. Since 1989, this has helped conserve over 2,200 acres in town, and the town's $2.2 million investment has resulted in $5.2 million worth of land conservation over the life of the fund. This is the fund that was most recently used by the town to purchase the Catamount Community Forest. In terms of putting money in the fund, the Select Board typically puts $60,000 to $70,000 each year in the fund. However, in this fiscal year and the upcoming one, it's likely that no money will be placed in the fund due to uncertainty related to COVID-19.
Let's take a look at a theoretical example. Here are the parcels that are eligible for subdivision in the residential zoning district. The parcels shown in maroon are greater than 10.5 acres. When constrained land, like steep slopes and wetland buffers, are calculated out, we're left with 330 acres of developable land. The survey preference was to conserve land and not build 1/3 of future residential units throughout the town. What would it take to not build 1/3 of the units just on parcels greater than 10.5 acres in the residential zoning district? we have 330 acres of unconstrained land, an approximate land value of $25,000 per acre. We base this number off a recent property transaction in the residential zoning district. Do the math, and we get an estimated value of $2.75 million. Comparing the annual ERF contribution of $60,000 to the hypothetical dollar value of $2.75 million to take 1/3 of the acreage out of the RZD from development. With the ERF alone, that would take 40 years to purchase that land. Keep in mind that the ERF fund is typically used to leverage state and federal funding for land conservation. So the $2.75 million that our theoretical example calculates is only for the parcels shown in maroon in the residential zoning district and doesn't take into consideration land conservation goals that Williston has outside of the residential zoning district in the rural part of town. Remember that the Planning Commission is collecting information and input as they consider an amendment to the RZD open space requirements. There are several options available to enhance the existing goals for open space. While survey respondents most often ranked open space as a top 3 priority, other categories like number of dwelling units, street path connectivity, and affordability were also ranked as important. Recall that a minimum percentage open space requirement would likely change the design of new subdivisions and enhance existing goals for open space in the residential zoning district. But it will not do things like changing the allowed number of dwelling units, the allowable density, or other things like architectural design or the amount of traffic generated by a new development. Vehicle congestion and environmental impacts were most frequently ranked as important by survey respondents when thinking about the impacts of growth in Williston throughout the town. Schools, noise, and emergency services were also ranked. In the live Planning Commission meeting, we will form small groups using Zoom breakout rooms. When we return to the large group, Planning Commission members will report back with what they heard in their small group. What is the problem we're trying to solve? This is the first question we would like you to consider in your breakout room. And secondly, is an amendment to the RZD open space requirements the best solution? When prompted on your screen, click Join Breakout Room. Telephone participants are automatically joined. The Zoom window on your computer will reset when you switch into and out of the breakout rooms. When we return to the large group, the Planning Commission members will report back to everybody about what they heard in their small group.
Necessary on that land. But then traffic, the habitat, contiguous land, and the environment, all based on traffic and density issues.
Thank you, Joe.
Yep.
G, would you like to go next?
Oh, G, you gotta
You're
unmute.
still on mute.
Sorry about that. So in our group, we mainly focused on the first question of what are we trying to accomplish. And a couple people thought that the path that Williston has been on for the past 10, 20, 30 years has been a good path. In other words, they liked what they were seeing as far as the growth of the community, specifically having the leaving open space out in the agricultural area and keeping more like a village type of buildup within the town. And then the other thing, on the other hand, I think that a couple of the people were more in tune with they weren't sure that that we would be accomplishing what they wanted to do by having more open space. In other words, traffic congestion, things that were that are happening in Williston are not going to be solved by open space because the developers can continue to put as many units as they want in, excuse me, not keep the same amount of units as proscribed by the zoning laws to within a piece of property. So they're not sure that open space is the solution to the problems that they see within the town.
Thank you, G.
Yep.
Shayla, do you want to go next?
I do. Thanks so much. Thank you to the folks who participated. I think we had some really good comments. I appreciate you coming and giving them. So there was similar to actually what has been said so far, general consensus that the concept of keeping the development within those areas that have already been developed and keeping it out of the rural areas, both for people, but also for the health of the environment and the ecosystem. But that one big piece that's not being discussed or addressed, and that open space may help achieve with the right boundaries, is connectivity between neighborhoods in the RZD. So the ability of people to move neighborhood to neighborhood without using cars, and that really hasn't been addressed. And if we're going to look at this open space, making sure that that can be a part of that, because that's an important part of life in that area of town that hasn't gotten enough attention potentially. And the last piece was that a similar concern around traffic, and that open space will not address traffic concerns, particularly on Mountain View Road. So those were the general gist. Again, similar to what's been said, with the caveat of this importance of connectivity between neighborhoods in the RZD, and how to best improve that for non-automobile traffic.
Thank you, Shayla, and that resonates with many of the written comments we received. Megan, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you to the participants in my breakout room. We had a diversity of opinions, and we also only got to the first half of the questions, so, about what is the problem we're trying to solve. So that's my caveat. Definitely some members felt that there wasn't really a problem to solve, and that our present system is working, and that very few properties would be affected by a change in the open space requirements, and that the present subdivisions have a fair amount of open space, like Brennan Woods and Southridge, Old Stage Estates, and so forth. And so the thought was, it's not fixed, don't it's not broken, don't fix it, right? I almost said it backwards. And then also kind of along the same lines were some comments that that what is going in now was always intended to be that way, like in Taft Corners in particular in the growth center. And then also that the sewer district already restricts the amount of growth, and of course that's within the context of the growth management process. So then some different views were concerns about loss of open space, and particularly with regard to wildlife corridors. There was a lot of concern with an association between high traffic and high density. Also expanded emergency services, and the general sense that Williston was changing and it was getting crowded. let's see. And also that the pace of development was very fast. And we on the Planning Commission know there are reasons behind that, but that is the sort of sensation that people get. And then another set of views that was a little, maybe a little bit more in the middle, but also concerned about growth is that the contributors summarized the surveys saying that most people feel there's too much growth in Williston, and there's a lot of dismay over the type of growth, obviously a somewhat separate question. And the suggestion that we try having a moratorium on new building until the current permits are built out, and then reflect on where we are and move forward from there. So that was one of the suggestions. So I'll stop there. I think that's fairly well summarizes.
Thank you, Megan. Kate, I know you're on the telephone. Are you able to give us an update?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, perfect. I'd like to thank everybody in my group as well. Really appreciate your time and your comments. We talked a little bit about that it's important to conserve open space for the environment and for the look and the feel of the town, and that once it's built, you cannot unbuild it. So it is important to put things in place that will allow us to conserve that resource. We also talked some about focusing it in the right place, focusing the development in the right places at the right density. So in the growth center, maybe denser, the agricultural areas, obviously less so, the residential zoning district somewhere in the middle. We talked a lot about the aesthetics of the growth patterns and how things are built and the type of building that are put up make a big difference. So a lot of dislike for Finney Crossing buildings, the block type buildings, not very welcoming, makes Williston not feel like a place you really want to be. So that was a major concern. Comments about if we have 50% open space, then putting 3-story buildings on the other 50% in order to fill that amount of units, that's not something that would be preferable. We would prefer maybe to limit the density if we're going to put a 50% or any type of percentage in place for the open space. Large buildings with large parking and a lot of surface covers. Water drainage was brought up as a concern. And the last thing was making open space that we have more intentional and more obvious. Brennan Woods was brought up as an example. You can't necessarily tell that there's open space because it's in between and it's behind and it's kind of interspersed. And an idea was to maybe make it a little bit more obvious that this is an open space you're driving by and it's nice and it's larger. One other point that was brought up that I thought was very good too was the idea of getting a lot of information from planning staff, from a lot of other people who kind of understand how the development works in Williston, because sometimes we might, or anyone might ask for something, but not necessarily see what it could cause down the line. So like more information from people who know a little bit more about how it works was asked for as well, which I thought was a very good point. And I think that's about it.
Thank you, Kate. I have a group, but Emily, is Ron on the call? I don't see him.
No, we only had 6 breakout rooms. Ron had to leave.
And so I'm the last one, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I'd like to take advantage of this moment just to say that the responses we got to the survey were amazing. There's 70 single space pages of typed comments, which in reading them, I started making notes in the margin of sort of patterns, you know, sort of general gist of where people were going. And it's wonderful input, if not for this process, then as we are rewriting the town plan next, because we don't often get that much thoughtful and detailed input. And so I want to thank everybody who supplied that input. In my group, I think I want to just clarify, it's John Martell and not Don Martell. And we went around the horn, and we have, if it's not broke, why try to fix it? A general desire to have open space, but probably even a larger desire by some people to limit development. And a reminder from Ken Beliveau, who's representing a developer this time, that Williston is the only town in Vermont that has growth management. And that's a result of efforts from 20 years ago to 15 years ago to try to limit the rate of growth, when we used to have 120 new units per year, and now we average less than 70 over the last 10 years. So that policy has already slowed growth to that point. If I may quote one of our participants, if people had been shown pictures, though, of Cottonwood and Finney Crossing back in 2008, when we're doing that version of the town plan, our town plan would probably look different. And so I felt as though if we had more time, the more relevant question we should be looking at is, if we were to try to slow development, how would we do that in a way that respects property owners' rights and manages for the future? If we had a chance at a second round. Yes, I'll leave it there.
Chapin, I guess my question for you is, do we want to open up to the broad group of 34 people, or would we like to go back into breakout rooms and it would be the same groups as before?
That's a really good question. I wanted to mention, if I may, after reading the 70 pages of comments, that I was surprised at how many people feel positively about allowing small business use, being surprised that the Adams Farming Market and the Catamount Golf area would not be allowed under the current zoning, and wishing that there were more mixed use development. That was in many of the comments. And I was also surprised in all the comments how strong the desire is for connected rec paths, and for people to be able to travel without going on the main roads by car, and also without going in a car at all. There seems to be strong values around that, stronger than we had heard in the Planning Commission previously. So I feel as though opening it up for discussion with this large of a group won't be as productive as going back to our small groups and maybe having a second round. And I guess I'd ask of the Planning Commission members, is the question that I posed the right one, which is, if we were to limit growth, how would we do it equitably and fairly? Sort of brainstorm doing that. Can you give me a thumbs up or something, Planning Commission members, if that's what you like as the next question?
Chapin?
Yes, Megan.
The second part of the question that was given to us in the script that my group did not have a chance to get to was, is an amendment to the RZD open space rules the best way to solve whatever the problem was? And I don't know if we, if there's a way to either address, like kind of incorporate some of your perspective as well. But I feel somewhat obligated to stick to that original question, since that that kind of framed and that was posed in the agenda and so forth. So I don't know that people have fully had a chance to weigh in on that.
let's check in with our groups on that to make sure we are ready to move on to a second question. And if you'd like to choose a different second question based on the makeup of your group, that's fine too. And let's go another round and come back. And if you can give us at least a 60-second warning, Emily, that would be helpful.
Yes, I'll do better this time.
Thanks. Okay, let's go back to our groups.
All right. I'm going to make the groups 20 minutes this time.
Thank you. It's 8:34, and we usually, our normal meetings end promptly at 9. Do we want to do the round of summary from the conversations that were just had? And if so, we should hold it to about 3 minutes apiece probably in order to make sure we're okay. Should we go in the same order? Jill, do you want to go first?
Sure. So our group had a good lively conversation for the second part, and I think there was just some continued curiosity, and Matt was able to come in for a bit of our conversation around, are those numbers for growth management, you know, can we move them and shift them? And it sounds like that was bylaws that were amended 3 years ago. So there's some interest in revisiting that. I think they liked the idea they heard from the last group checkout around the moratorium, see what's built out and maybe see where that goes. The second piece to that was sort of this idea to want to take care of what we already have. So taking care of our own roads and our own sidewalks that we already have that maybe currently aren't being maintained to the level of residents' desires. And also the snow removal, which I know has come up in our planning commission previously. So just wanting to take care of the things that we have before we start adding on more duties for the town to sort of have to manage. And then the complexity of affordability, we had some nice insights just with our various participants on all ends of the spectrum around this issue of if we are to have certain types of growth that's already, you know, shovels are already in the ground for some of those, respecting that some of those decisions were made in order to have mixed use spaces. So mixed use incomes, people that can afford things on various levels of various degrees. So, you know, in the end, the idea, which was said really nicely, that, you know, some people are trying to build things that are homes for people to be proud to come home to. And I think the Willistonians in our group also want to be proud of those homes too. So whether that's the aesthetic or the ways that they're entering the community and not adding more burden to our traffic or our noise or, again, the town services. So it was a good, robust conversation.
Thank you, Jill. G?
Yeah, so we addressed both questions. So as far as the concern about, or excuse me, the question about the amendment is the best way to solve the problem, we range from no to some concerns about it. One of the things was disconnected parts. There was a fear that unless we had some kind of other modifier to the how much open space to allow or to require, that we need to make sure that they're interconnected between neighborhoods, make sure they work for wildlife, that type of thing. So we want to make sure that when two properties next to each other get developed, there's not a spot where there's development and then a different spot in the next development next door. There was a comment about that we could go with less development units per acre type of thing, but then this would impact affordable housing, okay? Wouldn't have as much affordable housing because the developer still has to make a profit, that type of thing. And the comment was made about community centers, that we need to focus more on community centers, as well as bringing some vibrancy to the village zone, where, you know, there used to be a coffee shop, that type of thing, that might help that area of town to be a cohesive unit in itself. Comment was made is we are a suburb of Burlington, and you know, so some of the development is being within town is being caused by that. I think people want a more of a small town feel to it. That's why one of the persons moved here, and I think that that's pretty much the flavor of what we talked about.
Thank you, G.
Yep.
Shayla?
All right, we had a good conversation, and there was some back and forth about whether or not the best idea is to let market forces push the speed of development, or whether to have it be controlled as it is now, and whether or not the current rate is appropriate. And you know, I think the balance of that conversation, G, you pointed out the affordability piece came up, in terms of making sure it's affordable, but also doing it at a speed that allows for thoughtful planning and thoughtful development. And so how do you balance that? So there's just some back and forth about that in our conversation. You know, do you only focus on the where and the how, versus do you control the speed? There was also a little bit of conversation. We talked about whether or not, sorry, let's get to this. Whether or not this 2.7 million number that was discussed in the presentation, well, that's the number that it would be if we had to buy all of the rights today. That's not how it works. And so while that sounds like a really big number compared to what the current fund has in it, you know, we can still use this fund strategically, and we could still probably achieve a lot of these goals with that investment, even though we can't do it all at once in this moment with the money that we have right now. And that this money should be seen as an investment and not as an expense by the town, in order to preserve some of this open space. So just a conversation about that fund, and even though the balance looks so off compared to what would be needed to do this work in the RZD, that in fact it might not actually be as bad as it looks, because again, there's some time there and discretion. That was the big thing. I did ask at the end, just a follow-up question, if there's other big things that the group wanted to bring up or talk about, and both noise and light pollution came up as topics for the Planning Commission to consider as well going forward. That's it.
Thank you, Shayla. Megan?
Yeah, I think our group had some similar views to the ones that have already been represented, so I'll try to keep it short. I would say that the question of open space is really under review. I wouldn't say that anyone thought it was going to be the perfect tool, but rather that it could get some of the goals moved forward. For example, particularly in terms of you know, relationships between areas of wildlife conservation and other kinds of benefits of open space. At the same time, there was a sentiment in my group that perhaps the real issue is about growth control, and maybe it would be more important to focus on the speed and number of units being permitted, and think about the ways that the different patterns that those emerge in. There was a concern about farmers needing flexibility to develop their land if that was their nest egg for retirement. And also a reminder that those working landscapes that we all love so much are thanks to farmers. I think overall our group felt like this was a really useful conversation, and thanked Cherry and her group, the Citizens for Responsible Growth, for getting the conversation started. And my sense is that there are a lot of great ideas and strong views out in our community, and that I hope that this is the first of several ways that we'll be interacting and soliciting comments.
Thank you, Megan. Kate.
Hi, yeah. We talked, I think that the general consensus in my group was about aesthetics and about, like Megan said, less growth, or not necessarily less, but kind of reducing how it appears or whatnot. We discussed about possible design requirements or limits to the buildings that go into the RZD, such as limiting the number of stories to 2 stories and to 2 to 3, or at most 5 to 6, being as far as multi-unit buildings going into the RZD, not fitting crossing type buildings. A concern was brought up for how you account for vehicles when you have a lot of multi-unit buildings, and a desire not to have a whole lot of garages facing the street as you drive by or drive into a cul-de-sac. So aesthetics was a big concern. Traffic, we did discuss as well. Talked about possible rotaries as a possible ease of traffic, and Melinda also gave us a little history on that rotaries have been brought up in the past and whatnot, but they might be a reason for or a help to easing traffic issues. Pedestrian bike paths are a priority, and connecting neighborhoods as well, which has been brought up by other groups. And also possibly having a network of non-paved trails within the open space that can connect different neighborhoods was also desired. And also a question was brought up about enforcement and how much, how we enforce the zoning regulations. And Melinda did speak a little bit to that, although we did get cut off. So I think that sums up our discussion.
Thank you, Kate. And my group, we sort of talked, we have very different perspectives with overlapping values, but different perspectives. And so I'm not going to try to summarize, but rather just touch the points that were discussed or so forth. One is that some of the people that think that growth is happening too fast aren't against growth. They just want to both direct it, like make sure we don't lose open space, and perhaps slow it, not stop it. A couple of people have a disappointment in what Taft Corners looks like, and support affordable housing, and realize that if we change the number of units that are allowed by zoning, that affordable housing becomes a steeper hill to climb, and we already had struggled with it. And some suspicion about how things are done in the town, about having developers on boards, and people being not above board about what's happening. Also some discussion about if if someone has owned land for a long time, maybe pass it down through the generations and expected it to be their retirement income or what they pass. And if we keep restricting land more and more, that it reduces the value of that nest egg, if you will. And sort of the question of who pays for that open space, who pays for the maintenance of it once it is perhaps developed in a way that leaves a lot of open space. And then just some specific things that reminders, partly, mostly from Ken, that are a lot of our traffic is through traffic. A lot of traffic, especially on Mountain View and North Williston Road, is people who don't either start in Williston or end in Williston or both. And so it's not really in our control. The interconnectivity of trails and so forth is actually part of our bylaws and is one of the criteria that the DRB uses and asks for, and so we often get it, but the limitation is often wetlands or streams or other physical barriers. And that everybody probably would love to have seen the power lines at Taft Corners buried before all that development. You know, they used to run through farmers' fields. It was, and here we have that legacy overhead. That's from my group, and I would like to say, I would really like to express sincere thanks to Emily and Matt and Bonnie and Melinda from the planning office for all their preparation and support. And I feel as though the process with that survey was not just to get input, but to in fact get people to think like the planning commissioners, we planning commissioners have to think and decide and sort of think at a deeper layer than just what's your first opinion. And I really appreciate all the thoughtful comments we got from so many people. And I also want to say that a couple of things, if you've read the 70 pages of the full responses, that we received a few documents after that, and they have already been circulated to the Planning Commission and will become part of the record as well. And that includes Ken Beliveau had sent us some detailed comments about open space and how it's currently administered and other ways to deal with it. Shall we leave it at that? We are at 8:51. You're on mute, Emily.
Yeah, I guess while I have a captive audience, I'll give a plug for the Growth Center form-based code project that will be beginning in a couple of months. The town of Williston received funding to totally revamp and redo the design and architectural standards for the Growth Center, which includes the areas around Finney Crossing. So while those buildings are built, if you have opinions about how things look, this is a great opportunity to get involved and think about pedestrian-friendly Vermont architectural design. How do we want the Growth Center to continue to evolve? I think Williston's at this really unique crossings where we've had some strong standards in the past that have gotten us to where we are today. We see their weaknesses and now we're going to take them to the next level. So stay tuned over the next coming months. There'll be a lot of public participation to contribute to the form-based code project for the Growth Center.
Thank you, Emily. And I should also, in terms of looking forward, put in a plug that our next meeting, I think we will be participating with the select board's second hearing on the town energy plan and public health amendments to the town plan. And so it probably is a month from now that we will be taking up this topic again. And that we have, as Emily outlined at the beginning, we have to decide, are we going to recommend something about it, ask for more information, or table it? We are not making any decisions tonight, and it's probably a month from now that we will be talking about that. Is that about right, Emily?
I think you'll have some time on September 1st, okay. But you are open on when you want to decide to make your decision. There's time. But yes, next meeting will be both a regular planning commission meeting and then jumping over to the select board for energy plan.
and I think I speak for all Planning Commission members in saying that all this input has been very valuable, well beyond the current thing that we're considering. It gives us a much better feeling for opinions and the reasons for opinions, and will help us do a better job going forward. And as Terry Moran has often said on Front Porch Forum, our meetings are public, are open to the public, and twice a month, and our agendas are published ahead of time, and we welcome participation. Our job as a planning commission is to represent the people of Williston in trying to look into the future and plan not what we're going to do next year, but what should be our longer term view, the 5 to 20 year view of where we need to go, where we want to go as a community. And it's not an easy task, and the more information we have from the people who live here, the more it's helpful to us. So thank you. And thank you, Planning Commission members, for leading breakout discussions tonight and preparing for this.
Yeah, I encourage anyone from the public to reach out to us as staff if you have questions. We're happy to meet with anybody, but via telephone or Zoom. And stay tuned to our Planners Corner newsletter. Based on all the feedback we've received in that survey, we're planning an interesting series for our upcoming Planners Corner articles that we think will be really interesting and exciting. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I think with that, I will close the open forum. Are we calling it a public hearing?
Open forum.
Open forum, I think, is what we're calling it. And again, thank you all for your participation and for your thoughtful contributions. Take care.
Thank you.